What if the one person everyone overlooked turned out to be the only one who could save them? What if following orders meant letting people die, and breaking them meant rewriting the future? This is the untold story of Major Aisha Khan, a pilot. Silenced, sidelined, and underestimated, until the day everything went wrong, and she went right. From being grounded without cause to flying the most elite missions in NATO, her journey is more than just about combat. It's about courage, identity, and the price of rising above bias. If you've ever doubted yourself or been doubted by others, this story is your proof. Excellence doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up, ready to fly. It began like any other morning at Al Udeid Air Base, but something about the silence that hung in the air just before dawn felt heavier than usual. Captain Aisha Khan stood on the tarmac, her boots planted firmly on the concrete, her helmet cradled under one arm. She had arrived early, earlier than she needed to. That was how she operated. Disciplined, meticulous, prepared. The warm desert wind brushed across her flight suit as she did her final walk-around of the F-16 Falcon beside her, fully fueled. Systems check complete. Green across the board. She was ready, but the question wasn't whether she was ready. It was whether they would let her fly. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. Colonel Marcus Thompson, decorated, respected, and determined to keep her grounded. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Captain Khan," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "There's been a change in the flight plan. You won't be needed today." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a request. It was a decision. Already made, already enforced. Behind him, two younger male pilots exchanged glances. One of them smirked. The other looked away. Aisha didn't speak. Not yet. She wanted to hear the rationale, wanted to give him a chance to say it outright. Thompson took a slow step forward. "This exercise will be live tactics, unpredictable, stressful." His words hung. "In the air, heavy with implication. We need pilots who've been through it before." There it was. No mention of her flight hours. No reference to her top scores in simulation drills. No acknowledgement of the fact she'd spent months preparing for this NATO joint exercise. To him, none of that mattered. Her name was on the roster. But her value in his eyes wasn't. The Falcon she stood beside was the same one she had prepped the night before. Same tail number, same serial tag. But now, according to the flight board, it was marked maintenance hold. No one could explain what had supposedly gone wrong, because nothing had. But that didn't stop Thompson from repeating his final line. "Stand down, Captain. That's an order. Orders in the military are everything. But what do you do when the orders you're given are meant to clip your wings?" Aisha turned slowly, her jaw clenched but her expression unreadable. The two junior pilots had already started their walk toward their jets, laughing at a joke she wasn't invited to hear. She stood there alone, still, silent. The Falcon's twin tails cast long shadows in the rising light. Its cockpit canopy gleamed in the amber glow of dawn. She'd flown that bird in every scenario they had trained for. Storms, night ops, jammed communications, simulated combat. She never wavered. But this wasn't about training. This was about trust. And clearly she hadn't earned theirs. Or maybe, she thought quietly, she had earned it. But they weren't ready to admit that yet. As the roar of the first jet engine pierced the morning stillness, Aisha didn't move. She watched the formation take off without her. Their mission had begun. Hers. She realized was just getting started. Because what none of them knew, not Thompson, not the others, not even the base commander, was that within the next 6 hours the exercise would spiral into something no one could predict. And the only pilot capable of turning disaster into survival was the very one they left behind. Aisha Khan wasn't supposed to become a fighter pilot, not according to the expectations of her conservative Pakistani-American family, and certainly not according to the unspoken rules of a profession that, for decades, had been overwhelmingly male. But even as a child growing up in Houston's South Side, she was drawn to the sky. While other kids were chasing soccer balls, Aisha was sketching aircraft silhouettes in her school books. When she was 12, her uncle, an engineer at NASA, took her to a live air show. The moment she saw the thunder of jets slicing across the sky, she knew. That wasn't just a dream. It was a calling. Still, dreams don't fly on their own. She had to fight for every inch. In high school, she was the only girl in the school's aviation club. She memorized aircraft manuals while her classmates went to prom. At home, her parents were loving but confused. They hoped she'd choose medicine or law. Something safe, something normal. She chose the U.S. Air Force Academy, and to the surprise of almost everyone, except Aisha, she got in. The academy wasn't kind, it wasn't meant to be. The training was ruthless, the expectations crushing. Only the best made it through. But Aisha didn't just survive, she excelled. Top 5% of her class, awarded best in aerial tactics, commended. For split-second decision-making. Still, excellence wasn't armor. Not in a field where culture often trumped credentials. When she transitioned to operational assignments, the whispers followed. Diversity hire, quota filler. It didn't matter how many simulations she aced, or how many instructors noted her cool under pressure. The locker room jokes, the offhand comments, the sideways glances whenever she entered a briefing room, all reminders that she didn't look like the typical combat pilot. Her solution? Outfly them, outstudy them, outlast them. And slowly she began to turn heads. Even if no one said it out loud, they noticed. They had to. Because when your maneuvers save a drone from spiraling into a hillside during a joint exercise in Turkey, when your analysis cuts mission failure rates in half, people listen. But respect? That's harder to earn, especially when the rules weren't written with you in mind. So when Aisha was finally deployed to Al-Udeid, she carried more than her flight gear. She carried the weight of proving, again, that she deserved her wings. 6 months into the assignment, she'd logged more hours in simulation than anyone else in her unit. She'd memorized the NATO playbooks. She'd run every contingency plan backward and forward. Desert Shield was her chance, her moment, until Colonel Thompson took it away. But as she stood on the tarmac that morning, watching those jets vanish into the rising heat, she wasn't thinking about revenge or justice. She was thinking about what came next, because real change doesn't begin in the skies. It begins on the ground, with someone brave enough to keep going even when the runway seems closed. And that someone, as we'll soon see, was Aisha Khan. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the first signs of trouble broke across the radio. A clipped voice, unmistakable stress behind the military precision. Mayday, this is Valkyrie 2, engine flameout, attempting emergency descent. Aisha froze. She was still in the hangar, reviewing flight manuals, trying to quiet the frustration of being grounded. But now, every mechanic, every technician around her had stopped moving. The words hung in the air. Emergency. Real. Not simulated. And it was just the beginning. Over the next 20 minutes, more transmissions poured in. Another aircraft reported hydraulics failure. A third had lost GPS sync and veered into a live fire zone. Then came the worst update. Valkyrie 4 crashed. Rough terrain. Crew trapped. Injured. The line between exercise and disaster had just vanished. Command scrambled to respond, but the logistics were failing. Communications were jammed across NATO frequencies. Medical support was 90 minutes out, and nearly every flyable jet had already been deployed. Except on the F-16 parked in the corner of the hangar, the one labeled maintenance hold. Aisha's Falcon. She didn't need to check it again. She already knew it was flight ready, but she checked anyway. Fuel levels, full, system diagnostics, green, no anomalies, no reasons left to say no, except protocol. She turned to the crew chief, a grizzled tech sergeant who had been watching her closely. He gave the slightest nod. "She's good to go, Captain," he said. Aisha looked toward the command tower. No orders had been issued to her, no green light, but she wasn't waiting anymore. She sprinted to the equipment cage, suited up, and climbed into the cockpit. Her hands moved on instinct. Switches flipped, systems roared to life. She radioed the tower. Captain Khan requesting immediate clearance, supporting Desert Shield emergency response. A pause, then a voice she recognized. Colonel Thompson. Disbelief wrapped in command authority. Denied. Return to hangar. That's a direct order. But this time she didn't hesitate. Understood, sir, she said. Then she clicked off and took off, because somewhere beyond the horizon, people needed help, and she had the only wings left to get them there. The cockpit of an F-16 is a place of purpose, tight, precise. Every switch, every dial, every vibration humming with potential. And in that moment, Captain Aisha Khan didn't feel rebellious. She felt responsible. As the afterburners kicked in, the Falcon lunged into the sky. The roar echoed across the base. In the control tower, chaos erupted. Technicians scrambled. Thompson shouted into the radio. But Aisha tuned it all out. She was already en route, altitude climbing, eyes scanning, mind locked. Only she wasn't chasing orders now, she was chasing time. 60 miles north. Desert Shield had collapsed into confusion. 3 aircraft down. 2 crews unaccounted for. Terrain hostile, the kind that broke landing gear and shredded coordination. She needed to think like a tactician, but fly like a rescuer. At 14,000 feet, her radar lit up. Valkyrie 4's transponder was still pinging, faint, but alive. She switched to thermal overlay, scanned the ravine. Nothing. Then, movement. Heat signatures, 2 bodies near the wreckage. Alive, but not moving. Below, the terrain was brutal. Rock shelves, wind shear. No clean approach, but Aisha had trained for worse. She switched to manual throttle. Took the Falcon into a low sweep. Feet above the jagged surface, G-forces rattling her ribs. She marked the LZ, relayed. Coordinates to base, no response, so she made the call herself. Executing emergency drop, no time to wait. She banked right, released the survival pod. It struck 200 feet from the crash site. Inside, medkits.com's beacons, rations, a temporary lifeline. Next, she circled west. More radio chatter now. A British pilot trying to reach Allied command. A German. UAV operator reporting another downed aircraft. Desert Shield was falling apart at the seams, and she was the only pilot actively responding. For 90 minutes, she flew solo. 9 separate passes, marking, scanning, dropping, relaying. At one point, her Falcon took light damage, scraped wing from a narrow rock wall, but she didn't stop, didn't hesitate, because she wasn't there to play hero. She was there to make sure no one got left behind. And slowly, miraculously, the tide began to shift. Rescue chopper reached Valkyrie 4. Then a NATO medevac unit arrived at LZ Bravo. They were following the trail she'd carved in the sky, one bold line at a time. As the sun began its descent, Aisha received a new transmission, encrypted, marked Priority Alpha. Return to base immediately, general arrival expected. She turned the Falcon south, base in sight, hands steady. Mission not yet over, but her message had already been written, in flight paths and rescue markers. And soon the people who mattered most would finally understand what she'd been trying to prove all along. She wasn't there to break rules. She was there to break barriers. The landing gear kissed the runway, smooth, precise, a perfect touchdown under pressure. But this wasn't over, not even close. As Aisha powered down the Falcon, the ground crew rushed toward her, some with confusion, some with admiration, but none with answers. She climbed out, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes locked on the operations tower. Inside, the tension was thick enough to slice. Colonel Thompson stood at the edge of the room, flanked by 2 officers. He didn't speak. Didn't have to. His glare said it all. You went rogue, his eyes seemed to say. But you also did what none of us could. Aisha reported directly to base command. Every pass, every drop, every relay she had executed. The board lit up as coordinates and logs were cross-referenced, and then a shift, a hush. Someone new entered the room. General Helena Ruiz, commander of V. Allied Air Response, the highest-ranking official in the region. Decorated, decisive, and very, very curious. She spoke directly to Aisha. I monitored your comms. You took initiative. You saved lives. A pause. But you disobeyed a direct order. Another pause. What I want to know is, why? Aisha met her gaze, didn't flinch. Because they didn't have time, ma'am, she said. Because I was the only one who could get there fast enough. She could feel Thompson's eyes burning into her, but she didn't care, because General Ruiz didn't look angry. She looked impressed. The briefing that followed was unlike any Aisha had ever been a part of. Instead of a reprimand, the command center reviewed her data, thermal scans, GPS trails, timeline overlays. Every move she made was precise. Every decision, sound, every call, justified. The operations chief shook his head. 8 targets marked, 2 crews assisted, 3 survivors. Stabilized, all in under 2 hours. Another officer added, we had 5 Allied units grounded. She flew solo. Silence. Then Ruiz spoke. Do we have video? The technician nodded. From the Falcon's external cam. They played it back. The footage showed a machine dancing, inches above jagged cliffs, wind swirling, rocks threatening every second, and yet stable, intentional, commanding. When the video ended, no one spoke. Ruiz turned to Thompson. She did what needed to be done. Then to Aisha, you didn't break protocol, you rewrote it. Word of her actions spread fast. By evening, NATO command had issued a commendation, unofficial for now, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. At dinner, some of the pilots who once ignored her came to shake her hand. One even asked about her flight pattern technique. She shared it, freely, because that's what real leaders do. She wasn't there to humiliate. She was there to elevate. Thompson never apologized that night, but the next morning he did something better. He entered the command tent, nodded once, and said, you led yesterday. That deserves respect. That was enough. Because Aisha Khan didn't need their permission to rise. She just needed one chance, and she'd made it count. It was just after dawn when the official summons arrived. Aisha was in the maintenance bay, double-checking a thermal calibration she didn't need to do. The message came in through her comms unit. Report to Strategic Command Briefing Room. Immediate. No sender listed, but she already knew who it was. Inside the command room, the energy was different. 15 senior officers sat in a half circle around a digital display. At the center stood General Helena Ruiz. At her right, NATO command. At, her left, 2 representatives from Allied Air Training Division. Aisha stood at attention, silent, waiting. Ruiz stepped forward. Captain Khan, you're not here to be reprimanded. A beat. You're here to be recognized. She motioned to the screen. It displayed a full schematic of Operation Desert Shield. Crash sites, recovery vectors, a web of data layered with timestamps. Then, overlaid in yellow, Aisha's flight path. Ruiz continued. You flew for 3 hours, 26 minutes, conducted 12 tactical flyovers, supported 3 live rescues, provided guidance to 7 multinational units in real time. Every head in the room was watching the screen, but every eye was really watching. The Allied training rep leaned forward. Instructor-level judgment under combat conditions. The NATO officer nodded. She kept the battlefield from becoming a death trap. Then Ruiz asked the question no one expected. Colonel Thompson, do you still believe Captain Khan wasn't ready? The room went still. Thompson stood, cleared, his throat, and for once looked unsure. I misjudged, he said finally. She didn't just perform, she led. Ruiz nodded, then stepped closer to Aisha. I have flown more combat hours than anyone in this room, she said. I've never seen flying like what you did. A pause. And I've never seen that kind of resolve. She turned to the board. Effective. Immediately, Captain Khan is recommended for promotion to major. Murmurs rippled across the room. Ruiz continued. She is also nominated for the Allied Distinguished Flying Cross and offered placement with the 173rd Special Reconnaissance Wing. Aisha's throat tightened. The 173rd was elite. They didn't recruit, they selected. Ruiz closed the file in her hands. You changed minds yesterday. But more importantly, you saved lives. You showed that excellence isn't about rank or background. It's about timing, skill, and courage. As the briefing ended, the officers stood, one by one. Several approached Aisha, some apologized, others asked for her methods, but none questioned her anymore. Outside, Thompson stopped her, held out his hand. "Major Khan," he said. "Thank you." She shook his hand, firm, calm, no anger left, only clarity. Because recognition was never the goal. Doing the right thing, that was. And now, at last, the world had caught up. 6 months later, the night air over Ramstein Air Base carried a different kind of electricity. The dull hum of distant rotors, the glint of black-painted fuselages under moonlight. Aisha Khan, now Major Khan, stood by the hangar doors, suited up, clipboard in hand. Around her, members of the 173rd Special Reconnaissance Wing moved with silent purpose. This wasn't a squadron. This was a surgical team in flight suits, each one elite, each one selected, and she was one of them. No more second-guessing, no more proving, just flying. Her new bird was a modified F-35 Shadowhawk, stealth-enhanced, precision-tuned. A machine built for missions no one talked about. Tonight's op was classified. Personnel extraction. Rural Eastern Europe. 2. A NATO engineers caught in a cross-border intelligence breach. The mission window. Tight. The terrain. Unpredictable. Weather. Deteriorating. Exactly the kind of chaos Aisha was now trusted to navigate. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jack Morales, handed her the flight tablet. 37 minutes to entry point. We go low and fast, real fast. She nodded, checked the instruments, then looked out at the stars. Not with awe, but with purpose. This wasn't the same woman who once stood grounded on a Qatari runway. This was the version forged by fire. As they ascended into the night, tower comms gave them final clearance. Shadow 1, green to go. Safe skies, Major. She keyed the mic. Roger that. Wheels up. The aircraft lifted, slicing into the dark like a whisper of steel. They flew beneath radar, threading mountain valleys like a thread through needle's eye. Jack kept watch. Aisha piloted like she was part of the machine. And in a way, she was. They reached the extraction site 23 seconds ahead of schedule. Signals flared. Dust kicked. The engineers scrambled aboard. Inbound fire was spotted, simulated. Part of the test. The 173rd didn't just fly missions. They created their own crucibles. Aisha banked hard, veered east, pulled altitude while masking under canyon shadows. Every decision tight, every second counted. They returned to base without a scratch. Debrief was minimal. Mission success was expected here, but Jack turned to her afterward. "Never seen flying like that," he said, "and I flew with Commander Voss in Kandahar." Aisha smiled. It wasn't about outdoing anyone. It was about living up to what she knew she could do, what she always could. Now she didn't need permission. Now she just needed a destination. Back at her quarters, a new message awaited. From General Ruiz. "Your tactics from Desert Shield have been adopted into Allied pilot training protocols." Another line followed. "Also, we've got an open advisory seat in Brussels. I'd like you to consider it." Aisha exhaled. That seat was rare, one step below policy architect. But more than that, it was proof. Proof that actions speak loudest when no one's listening, and that sometimes the sky really does belong to those bold enough to reach for it. As she stared at the message, the shadow of her aircraft passed across the moonlit tarmac. No longer silent, no longer overlooked. Major Aisha Khan wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a force. And the sky. It had finally learned her name. Some stories end with medals, but the best ones, they end with change. Aisha Khan didn't just prove she belonged. She proved how wrong the system was to question her in the first place. She wasn't just a great pilot. She was the best they had, and she was there all along, waiting for a chance they tried to keep from her. So if you've ever been dismissed, diminished, or doubted, remember this. The sky doesn't care who you are, only how well you fly. And once you rise, they can't ignore you, not ever again. If this story moved you, share it because someone out there is still being told they're not ready, and they need to know. Maybe they already are.